I think as teachers, we have to get out of our own discomfort and really lean in to be able to hold that space tenderly and realize that this is not about us. It's really about helping our students transition as smoothly and as beautifully as possible. And this is really the human condition, isn't it? This is really, and same with our anyone going through chronic illness. It's how can we show up for them and get our ego out of the way.
Namaste. You're listening to the Savannah Podcast. Join us on an exploration of Eastern spirituality, yoga philosophy, and conscious living for the new age. This podcast is a production of SavannahSpirit.com, the best place to shop for unique clothing, spiritual handcrafted jewelry, healing gemstones, and fair trade gifts from the Far East. Now, here's your host, Brett Larkin.
Greetings, everyone. Welcome to the Savannah Podcast. As always, we've got a really great guest in store for you today. Before we dive in, I want to remind you to head on over to savannahspirit.com/contest to enter each and every week for the chance to win an $100 gift card for the Savannah Spirit store. All of us want to age gracefully in this lifetime, and our special guest today is going to explain to us how we can do exactly that using our yoga and meditation practice. Carrie Hensley has been practicing yoga for 19 years, and she is the director of yoga for YMEDICA, a company developing evidence-based yoga programs and yoga teacher trainings around the country. And several of these focus on giving those 60 and over new opportunities for physical and spiritual growth. I'm really excited to dive into especially the spiritual aspect with her. And in today's episode, we're going to learn how you at home can use yoga and meditation to age optimally, how you can introduce yoga and meditation to older family members and friends in a way that is approachable and appropriate, which is something I'm always excited to learn more about. And we're also going to learn some yogic practices such as the rain technique and just other practices that can help us really achieve non-reactivity on the mat and also in our life. So, Carrie, thank you so much for being with us today.
Brett, it's such a joy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So this is going to be a very obvious first question that I wanted to ask you to start, but I wanted to ask you, can yoga actually help us age better? And is there evidence to support this? Because I feel like a lot of people who do yoga all the time, like me, they're like, yes, of course, that's a given. Yoga should help me age, but I know so much of what you're doing at YMEDICA is actually building what you call these evidence-based approaches to these kinds of questions. So tell us about that.
Sure. Well, we actually partnered with Arizona State University on 2 studies. And what we found is yoga, in fact, can help us age gracefully and successfully. Our studies found that it helps not only improve functional strength, but it is actually a fall prevention tool, which is really important because 1 out of 3 individuals 65 plus has a fall each year. And that's a pretty staggering statistic when you think about our moms, our parents, that kind of thing.
Right, and I feel like it's never just the fall. I mean, even thinking back to my grandmother, it was like a fall that led to her having to go to the hospital that then led to, pneumonia and all these other cascade of, just illnesses, really. So...
Well, and you touch on the point. It isn't the actual fall. It's the detraining of the body that happens, right? For especially someone our grandparents' age, they might be at a level that's healthy for their cardiovascular system. But once they are hospitalized for an extended period of time, this detraining effect happens on their cardiovascular system. And so now they're almost in respiratory failure. So yes, it's really important. And I think the biggest thing is the quality of life. We can add so many years, which is what we're doing, I think, in the Western medical arena, is adding years, but we want quality. I want this demographic to really be able to savor the last years that they have for the spiritual studies, for being able to spend time with their family. They've put in the time that they've had.
So I think you and hopefully all our listeners would agree that those of us who've had a stable yoga practice our whole life, I mean, I know you've been teaching yoga teachers for 19 years, and many listeners have a very strong yoga practice. We can carry that with us as we age, which is wonderful and a huge benefit. But my impression is a lot of people you work with and a lot of what your trainings involve is how to approach people who are 60 and over who've maybe never set foot on a yoga mat or don't even know what yoga is. How do you approach that?
Well, I think by sharing that it is evidence-based makes them feel safe. And also our particular approach, you can either teach it in a chair or on a mat. So they can come in and it's not intimidating. So for us, it's really about inclusivity. It's also about, I think, re-educating, because I think we see these amazing, beautiful photos on Instagrams or in magazines, and we assume that you have to be flexible. I'm sure you hear that all the time in your classes. Oh, I can't do yoga, I'm not flexible. That's why you come to yoga, to increase your flexibility, to build your flexibility. So yes, you can absolutely start yoga just with the breathing techniques.
And I love that you mentioned that, because one of the first techniques that I taught my father, who I was telling you about before we started recording, was actually just a very simple breathing technique, because he had experienced a lot of anxiety when he went into I don't remember if it's the CAT scan or the MRI machine, but there's some machine where you go in and you have to be completely still. It's extremely claustrophobic. And I'm curious for you to tell us more about that, because I think almost like always with yoga, it's like the breath is really the best place to start. And it seems like you found this with the 60 and over population as well.
Absolutely. With this population, so much is being taken from them. They're losing their strength. They're losing their ability to care for themselves. And so doing something that they can control, such as the breath, that helps them remain in the present moment. Because how can we not at this age think about what's to come or our end of life? Or perhaps we're thinking about the past that we can't change. So again, it's just provides this beautiful opportunity to stay present to everything that's happening and really move into this process. And for me, one of the greatest gifts, my father is going through Parkinson's and dementia right now. And in my own experience, I wouldn't be able to lean into the experience of losing him mentally without yoga. And to give him a tool such as the breathing, when he knows something's happening and he's feeling confused, just to be able to take a deep inhale and a deep exhale helps to just minimize that stress, even for the few moments that he's able to do that.
And when you're teaching these breathing techniques or in your trainings or studies, have you just been doing it just sort of like you did right now, like inhale for 3, exhale for 3, or there are some machines or tools that you're giving folks as well? I know at some point my father was given even some sort of little machine that he was supposed to breathe into, and it would beep. And it seemed like there was some interesting maybe technology around some of this too. What have you guys seen be successful?
So we actually just use the natural breath, because for us, we're trying to integrate yoga into the healthcare system. So we want to make this as accessible to everyone as possible. So we recognize that people might not be able to purchase a breathing machine. So we use Nadi Shodhana, the alternate nostril breathing. One way that we will do that is even incorporating with the arms. So with our students that have dementia, to get them centered, we'll have them inhale, raise your left arm, exhale, release your right hand, inhale, raise your right arm. And the counting really helps, again, especially when we're working more with that demographic of 75 plus. And we know from research that practices such as Nadi Shodhana or exhaling twice as long helps to stimulate that parasympathetic nervous system. So we're engaging that relaxation response, which is important, especially when we're working with students, for example, that have COPD. We see the breath has been just instrumental in helping them with the anxiety of not being able to take a full breath, but to exhale twice as long, it really helps to exhale that stagnant air out of the lungs. So we're seeing how it helps mentally and physically.
And it sounds like they don't need to have had any prior yoga experience whatsoever. But how do you approach these folks? Because I'm sure for many listeners, including myself, a huge challenge when introducing yoga to someone who is older is sort of explaining to them what it is. And even the word yoga, and let me know if you agree, in our modern society right now, it comes with a lot, right? It's become a word that people already perhaps have a ton of connotations with. How do you guys best handle that?
And that's a great question, and especially with our 75 plus, where they might feel it challenges their religion. How do we introduce it and meet them where they are? So we might call it stretching, and we might call it breathing. So for us, again, it's really about meeting our students where they are, which I'm sure you do as well, right? It's so if I'm working with someone 75 plus, and I say, we're just going to stretch and raise our arm, or we're going to lift our leg, and then once we build that relationship and that trust, then we can bring in other concepts and ideologies that they might not have felt comfortable discussing. And then they're also more comfortable sharing what they're feeling and how they're moving. And I've had so many people come back and say, oh, I told my daughter I'm practicing yoga and she thinks that's great. So it's definitely more mainstream, but again, it's just meeting our students where they are.
Yeah, I agree. I very often call yoga stretching or other things when getting different people interested in it, and it works really well. And then you can introduce more of the yogic principles later on, which I want to ask you about. Tell us first more about this study that you guys did with Arizona State. How exactly did the study work, and what were the outcomes best you can recall? Because I think what you're telling us about people's balance improving, or some of these stats might even be fun for our listeners to share with parents or older family members.
Right. So the first study we did was more of an efficacy study. So we just wanted to prove, we didn't have a control group. We just wanted to see, does this work? And we were excited for the results. Although, again, those of us who have been teaching and in the arena know it works. But we saw 97% increase in flexibility for both upper and lower body, 31% increase in agility, and around a 60% in strength, both in upper and lower body. And then the second was an actual controlled study where we did the yoga group, and then this control group got information on things that they could do. And we had similar results from that as well. And in that one, we actually also introduced some subjective, how do you feel mentally? And the researchers were really surprised from Arizona State how many people said it was the community aspect that really made a difference for them, that they loved it. And even when the pilot was done, they continued to get together after the study.
That is very cool. So, okay, I want to know a little more detail. So was the program, was all of them were coming together for a half hour or hour of yoga / stretching / whatever we want to call it, a day? Is that sort of how it worked?
So we met 3 times a week for 60 minutes. They could do it in a chair or on the floor. For the efficacy study, we did it for 12 weeks. And then for the actual control study, we did it for 8 weeks. And that's what was so exciting, is that we had similar results in less time.
Wow. I think what you say about the community aspect is so important because, as you know, that's something I'm really passionate about building, because I think especially with online yoga, the community aspect can just get completely lost. It's just like, here's an online video, do it by yourself. So I've really strived to try to make community a huge part of everything that I do with my groups. But I think that especially now that we're talking about maybe being in the context of a hospital or a retirement or nursing home or even hospice, which I want to talk to you a little bit about later, this idea of coming together to breathe and move with others was actually some of these people's favorite part. Like, just that alone, in addition to the movement, made them feel so much better.
Yes. And our first study, we started with 15, and the program has grown to over 100 people simply by word of mouth. And one of the women actually purchased a bell for me because I couldn't get them to stop talking in the beginning. They get there 10 to 15 minutes early. If someone new came, they were quick to say, you can't sit there, Rosie's chair is there. And, so really, if someone was missing, they would call and make sure they were okay. So I think it's like everything else. And we know studies have shown that people who feel supported live longer. We have a second program that focuses on breast cancer, and that's a big thing for us. And same with, I think it's we all need community. We all need to feel that we're a part of something better than ourselves, but especially I think in these specific needs populations where they are being faced with their mortality sooner than most of us, that community provides a sense of validation of the movie Avatar that I love so much. It's that concept of I see you. It's namaste. The light within me honors, witnesses, and connects to the light within you. And I think we miss that in our daily life. We get so busy. And so this just provides them an opportunity to come together and talk about what's going on for them. The losses, the challenges, all of the things that we love going to a studio, or I'm sure your students love coming into your online community, that they can discuss and just have that commonality.
100%. It sounds like this is something, correct me if I'm wrong, that just happened completely naturally without you building in a specific community aspect to the program or anything like that.
Yes, but that was part of the aspect because there are 6 myths to the aging process. And the MacArthur Foundation talks about what we need to age successfully. And functional strength, mental adaptability, and then community are really important for that successful aging. So we did add that element, but we didn't realize it would really take a life on of its own. I mean, they do retreats together now and all kinds of things. So it just really grew beyond our expectations.
That's amazing. So tell us now more about the classroom setting in which this is happening in, because I'm a huge fan, as many know, of props. I love using as many props as I possibly can in my yoga practice. And I'm wondering if that's something that you found you needed to incorporate a lot, or because you're working perhaps in so many different settings and potentially clinical settings, you actually developed these teacher training programs and modalities that you have for older people to maybe even be less prop reliant and just use the chair. How does that work?
Yeah, and I do, from my own personal practice, I love props. But again, because we were trying to bring this to as many people as possible, realizing they're on fixed incomes, we designed the protocols so that they wouldn't need props. And that's where the chair comes in. Some people can't get up and down from the floor, so they'll just use the chair. Some people can stand, but maybe are not as adept on their feet, so they'll use the chair for balance. And then you can get down to the floor. Now, we tell people, especially if you have heart disease and COPD, because you want your head higher than your heart, if they have a towel or a blanket from home, they are certainly welcome to bring it. But we didn't want to develop a program that people have to spend out of pocket already on props and then on the actual price of the class as well.
That sounds very smart. And it sounds like from what you're describing that these classes are taking place where it's the same sequence, or as you said, sort of protocol for everyone, but some people are doing it in a chair and some people are doing it on the floor. Am I understanding that right?
Correct. And that's what makes it evidence-based, right? Is it's the same sequence every time you come so that you can measure. But research is also showing that we want to progress our students. And so someone that has not practiced in 30 or 40 years any type of exercise can come in and perform the same sequence that someone maybe is more active and they're just going to do it on the floor. And then again, that I like that because what we found is people start in the chair and they see what's possible and they challenge themselves and they want to continue to grow and improve. So that was the other thing, just hearing the results from people saying, I've gotten my confidence back, I'm not afraid I'm going to fall, you're giving me such hope. And that's, the statistics are there, the studies are great, that's what we need in the West. But as teachers, it's seeing our students be empowered themselves.
And I think that's so great because I think we hear this term chair yoga all the time, right? Talk to us a little bit about that, actually. But it sounds like what you guys are doing is, or what you've developed is actually that, no, it's this yoga class that is, yes, designed for an older population, but you can do it in a chair or you can do it on the floor, but everyone's united in the same thing. Because as much as I love chair yoga, and I think I have a video or two on YouTube, it is a little bit limiting, right? Because you're bound to the chair, which again, is maybe appropriate for some, but as you said, it's pretty cool for people to step in and then kind of see where this could go without the chair. To tell us about that.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I train teachers and they do the chair class, they're amazed at how challenging it can be because we still will do a warrior 2 in a chair. We still do a lot of core work because we need a strong core to support that balance prevention. So absolutely, and it's an empowering process. It's one of those that it's challenging, but it's necessary, and here's the other part. Statistics have also shown that visualization is just as powerful as if you're doing it. So if someone can't do an activity, we say as if you're doing it. Visualize as if you're lifting yourself up out of the chair. And so we will do bridge pose in a chair where depending on how long we've been practicing, they can actually shift their hips forward and off the chair and lift up. Now, that's not something I'm going to do with someone brand new to the practice, but again, you can continue to move and be challenged.
Many of our listeners might be yoga teachers themselves, and I know that you've developed a specific training for people who are over 60 in order to be able to teach this population, and then also for breast cancer. Before we move into some of our other questions about spirituality and end of life, do you want to tell listeners a little bit about both those programs? Because they can do them, if I remember correctly, online, so it's very accessible for teachers who want to sort of add this into their teaching repertoire.
Yes, and thank you for asking. So currently we have a 20-hour Rewind Gold Successful Aging online teacher training where they can receive continuing education through Yoga Alliance. And we delve into the physiology and psychology of aging. We have experts. The gentleman who helped us with our study from Arizona State, Andrew Miller, shares his perspective from Western medicine. In addition, what we have done, because I sometimes feel an online training misses that personal connection, that intimacy. So we did teacher roundtables and student roundtables where I'm sitting with a group of teachers and with students and asking them what they've received from the practice and from the training itself. And from most of our students, that's what they love the most about the actual online training is those interactive components. And then we're actually currently filming the breast cancer training. That's also 20-hour. It's focusing just specifically on breast cancer because there's just so much information to know and how we can support. And with that particular program, the practice of yoga is all restorative because I don't think at that point you can really do a lot of yoga when someone's actually going through treatment. And that's what we were working to try and do is help those patients and students who are actually going through treatment like radiation and chemotherapy.
Both of these are so important, and I think it's so great that teachers now have the opportunity to be able to specialize in or at least get a lot more detailed education in this arena, right? Because it is different from I think what many of us associate with the typical yoga arena. So I love that.
Well, and I appreciate the fact that yoga is so mainstream now. It's so beautiful that it's accessible, but it's someone who's 65 isn't necessarily safe for them to practice in a regular class. For some it is. So I love, yes, that we're seeing more specialty types of yoga programs coming out to make it as accessible to as many people as possible.
Because especially when people are going through something like breast cancer or they are older and perhaps dealing with chronic illness or surgeries, there is so much change and so much stress in their life. It's almost like, as you said at the beginning, these people need yoga more than anyone. And I think this is where we can start talking a little bit more, not just about the physical benefits, which we covered, but how the programs, or in your experience, what you've seen with this really helping people manage and stay grounded and feel safe in what is a very difficult period, I think, in terms of perhaps moving away from their home or changing where they live, perhaps going through a lot of difficult treatments of which the outcomes are uncertain, a lot of difficult decisions about which treatments to pursue and which ones not to pursue. It seems like yoga might be a huge source of comfort, but how is that best approached and what have you guys seen?
So in my own practice and in sharing these stories with a lot of our teachers, again, I think first we have to build that relationship and that trust. But after teaching for a few years in the assisted living facility, for example, I had a couple, Ralph and Evelyn, who were married for 65 years. And so you can just imagine, Brett, the fear of who's going to go first and what does that mean and how do you manage that? And so we just ended up having a discussion about it one day, staying after class and just obviously staying within the scope of my practice as a yoga teacher, but providing that safe place where they can just explore their feelings, where they can talk about their fears, and then providing them tools such as RAIN, which is one of my favorite meditation techniques, or giving them Nadi Shodhana, alternate nostril breathing. Do that 5 minutes a day before you go to bed. And I think the biggest thing is giving them the platform. And for example, in my own life with my dad, asking him how he's doing, giving him permission to be afraid. This is my first hero. And as I see him losing his mind, I want to make sure that as he goes through it, he knows he's not alone. And so it's being willing to lean in. I think as teachers, we have to get out of our own discomfort and really lean in to be able to hold that space tenderly and realize that this is not about us. It's really about helping our students transition as smoothly and as beautifully as possible. And this is really the human condition, isn't it? This is really, and same with our anyone going through chronic illness. It's how can we show up for them and get our ego out of the way?
So it seems like, based on what you've told us so far in these classes that you've been providing or in the protocols that you teach in the training, that I'm guessing they're very physical based. But naturally, just because yoga has the magic way of doing this, naturally it starts to infiltrate over time as they keep coming to help them understand that, wow, I'm getting maybe such a deep sense of peace from the physical. There's something more here. And that's where you're seeing maybe people stay after class and these interactions are happening.
Absolutely. And one of the women who shares in our online training said she cannot believe how it helped her anxiety levels. And
you're not saying Om or Namaste or chanting or doing anything in these protocols, correct?
Correct. Especially so with the breast cancer, it was an efficacy program just to see, and we worked with an institution. And so we had to make sure that we couldn't even say meditation. We had to say guided imagery. And so again, I think it's meeting the students where they are. And like you said, Brett, you might think you're doing physical practices. You might think you're just breathing, but all of a sudden after a few weeks, you're noticing that you're not as irritated. You're noticing that you're more jovial. You're noticing that you're more grounded in your body. And that's what one of our students was saying, is she had such a positive body awareness. And I love that because I think at that demographic, 70, 75 plus, you need to have that relationship with your body to know when it's starting to maybe not feel 100% and maybe you back off today or maybe you challenge so that you can really adapt to this process of aging.
Yeah, and to maybe know what interventions to accept and which to maybe push back on. And I know that can be so complicated for so many people. Tell us a little bit more about this visualization, because I think this taps into a whole field that's out there about whether it's positive visualization or visualizing healing and then actually seeing that manifest. What have you guys seen in regards to that?
So one of the guided imageries that we did was called a leaf meditation, where we encourage students to walk down a path and find a stream. And as they sit down, there's a pile of leaves. And go ahead and put any thought or any worry on this leaf and set it in the stream and watch it float down the stream and continue that process. And it's about a 5-minute visualization. And then come back and what we found is, again, this was introduced for our students going through breast cancer, and it was just so powerful for them because it's a technique they can take with them while they're receiving chemotherapy, while they're in the doctor's office, perhaps for a second diagnosis that is not what they wanted to hear. And I think what's so beautiful about yoga is there's so many aspects and elements, right? There's 8 limbs. So there's many tools that we can introduce. So that's one. Rain is my all-time favorite. It's a technique I learned through Tara Brach, and it stands for recognize, allow, investigate with intimate attention, and then non-identification. So it's this simple process of recognizing we're hooked or triggered. Maybe we're feeling anxiety. Allowing it, not trying to push down that feeling, emotion, or thought, and then investigating, where is it coming from? Get close to it, lean in, describe a color. Can you understand where it stems from? And then as you really start to get underneath the experience, you create a little bit of space where you're not attached to it. And that creates that non-identification. Now, for some of my breast cancer students, when they're investigating, if there's trauma, I'm not going to tell them, really get into that. And same with some of my seniors. Only do as much as you're comfortable with, because we also don't want to re-traumatize them and they might not be able to do it. So it just depends on which techniques are appropriate for which group. The leaf meditation is a great one for either one, because who doesn't have worries that they can't float down a stream and let go of?
That's wonderful. I'm really glad you shared the rain technique with us, because I was hoping you would do that. And even in just walking through the rain technique that you mentioned, what advice do you have for listeners who maybe want to do some of this work with parents or family or friends, or they see someone 60 over or 75 over in their life struggling? I think it can be intimidating to approach someone who's older, and I think you've given us some good ideas. I mean, telling them that this will help with their balance, that this can help with their anxiety. I mean, I know one of the ways I found an in with my father was he kept telling me how uncomfortable this MRI scan made him and how much he hated being in the machine. So it sort of stemmed from that pain point that then I was able to offer up let's try this breathing technique together. Next time you're in the machine, practice this breathing, relax your jaw, make sure to really relax your tongue, so it was through sort of him telling me about something that was really like a pain point for him that was sort of the opening. Do you think that's a good approach, or do you have other ways that you'd suggest? And especially then, I'd love your tips for getting into the more, a little bit, whether we want to call it spirituality or meditative practices that you just talked about, because I think those can be so invaluable, but it's like, how do we best approach someone to even be open to that when they're at that point in their life?
Great question. And again, I think it's for many people in that age demographic, like my dad, it isn't accessible. So the breathing is one of the easiest, I think, most accessible and less threatening techniques. And that's where I would encourage the listeners to start with, especially if you want to help your loved ones, but maybe you're not a teacher. So just have them start breathing, 3 times, 2 to 3 times the length, because for some seniors, 3 times is not accessible. So inhale 1, 2, exhale 1, 2, and then maybe even exhale 1, 2, 3, 4. The other thing that I think we can do to start supporting is just get curious as to what's going on with them. It's so easy in our busy lives to not have time. One of the things I hear a lot from people in assisted livings is they were pulled out of state to live closer to their kids so they can be watched and supported. We think as adults we're helping, and yet we've just removed them from their support system. So if we're going to do something like that, let's make an effort to go and visit them, because I can't tell you how many people in the assisted living facilities did not have that interaction. The yoga class was the only really personal connection and witnessing they were getting that week. And I think that's why it was so successful and just so special and sweet. And again, this isn't an attack. We are all so super busy. I understand that. It's what can you do maybe today? Maybe can you drop a card in the mail? I think the biggest thing is that connection, the reminder that we're all one. I just keep going back to that namaste. And when we can see that we're more alike than separate, then the necessary steps just happen. But the breathing is one. I think what you're telling your dad, relax your jaw. Maybe we're not even taught that. If they can, maybe meditate. Just close your eyes for a couple minutes at a time and just notice what happens across the screen of your mind. Don't try and stop thoughts, but just notice what comes up.
I know you're going through a lot of this with your father, so I'm hoping you're going to be comfortable to share, but I know for a lot of people that the act of visiting or the act of maybe being around this older population, for some who are younger, they actually find it quite depressing, right? And that's why they might be avoiding the visit or avoiding going, because they themselves it feels very unfun or frightening or uncomfortable or depressing to do that. What advice do you have when confronted with those feelings?
It is so natural to have those feelings, especially because we're not encouraged to accept the cycles of life and death. Think about how much money we spend on looking young in our culture. But here's something to think about as well. We're only going to have them in the physical for so long. And the way I think about it is I don't want to regret these last few years, even though they're painful. And I think I've had an opportunity to work through a lot of that working with this demographic, because if you are going to teach your seniors, you're going to lose them. And for me, Brett, there is pain. There have been days of tears. I've lost some of just the most special, sweet students, and I would do it again and again because I feel I get so much more from them than I could possibly share with them. And just to be able to witness just the grace that they have. And same for my dad. I mean, here was this attorney his whole life, and there's just so much shame. And to see him as a human being is just a rare gift for me. So yes, there have been many days where I've had conversation and I've gotten off the phone and I've just cried and let myself cry because you just want for them. But the reality is death is a natural part of living. So how can we use it as an opportunity to awaken to the truth of who we are? Because really the heart of yoga is we are not our body, we are not our mind. That's the concept of Purusha. We're beyond form.
Yeah, what you're saying, it sounds like for us as yoga practitioners going into this environment, using something like the rain technique that you mentioned, or even getting really centered with our own thoughts or meditating before we go for the visit actually could be highly, highly beneficial for sort of the person watching or assisting the aging person, that our yoga practice becomes equally, if not more, important in that context.
Completely agree, Brett. I do. And why not share where you're coming from with your loved ones? Dad, I'm so scared. This just breaks my heart. But this is where we are. So let's go through it together.
Yeah, or let's sit and do some breathing together.
Right.
Or sit and listen to this breathing video or recording. I mean, sometimes when you're like doing something together like that, it's a lot more approachable.
Right. Because we don't have to talk about death every time we see them, right? That's not the process. But I think it could be, because I don't know yet in this lifetime, I think it's going to be a more seamless transition. Yes, there will be sadness, but I'm not adding that element of resisting and not being willing to explore my pain and my feelings. But I love that idea of again, just as practitioners, really making sure that you as a caregiver are making sure that your self-care routine is intact and you're doing things that support and fill your own cup.
100%. Last question or so before we leave you for the rest of your day. I wanted to ask you, just before we let you go, about hands-on adjustments and the actual art of touch when it comes to working with both the older population and the breast cancer population. I can understand how in many ways it would make sense to teach teachers, or to maybe let them know that it's maybe not an ideal situation for hands-on, because you don't know, each person's medical history. They are older, perhaps have injuries you don't know about. However, at the same time, I think so many of these people are craving touch. And I know when thinking about my father, he's seen by doctors and specialists multiple times a week, but no one really touches him in that authentic way. And so whether it's as a yoga teacher or just for listeners who are not teachers, but dealing with their older family and friends, what is your thought on the art of touch and how that should best be integrated into the kinds of things we're talking about today?
I think the art of touch is a gift and it's necessary. As far as adjustments, 90% of seniors 65 plus have one chronic condition, 77% have two or more, and then there's 11 million that have 4 or 5 chronic conditions. So I do not teach adjustments in the trainings because you don't know what someone's going through. And for example, 50% of women over 50 have osteoporosis, and we want to make sure that we're not doing anything that's contraindicative for that. But that being said, at the end of every class, they would all line up and get hugs. And I am happy to give them hugs. I'm happy to walk through class and touch their back just to let them know they're supported, or maybe put my hand on their shoulder. For loved one, I think it's touch as much as you can, as long as your loved ones are receptive, especially going through Alzheimer's. Sometimes that creates almost a confusion. So depending on, but I think it's a lost art, especially for this demographic and for breast cancer patients, just to be able to touch them, but not necessarily. And sometimes they're in so much pain. So the other is asking permission. That's a huge one for me, is may I touch you? Because they just might have some things coming up that they just need space. And I also want to make sure that I'm able to respect that for them as well.
I am wondering, before we go, is there anything else you want to share with us, or for listeners who, again, everyone has parents and grandparents? Do you have any last words of wisdom that you want to share or impart before we end our time together? It's been so lovely to chat.
Oh, it's just been a gift, and thank you to all your listeners. I think the biggest thing that I think we're missing is trust yourself. You, at the end of the day, will know if you just connect your heart and come from that space of unconditional compassion and desire to commune with your loved ones. It will naturally unravel as it should.
That's wonderful. I agree. It can be so intimidating with all the medical language and all the, it's like our loved ones often just become the names of diseases in like our mind as they get older. And I think trusting yourself and really using your own yoga practice to get centered as a first step, and then trying to impart that to others and try to encourage your loved ones to trust themselves as well. I mean, I know with my dad, he's always faced with so many difficult choices, right? Like you could do A, B, or C, and I'm just constantly saying, well, what does your body say? How do you feel? And that's, I think, hard for him to tap into. But I think the more that we can introduce these programs that you guys are developing to an older population, so they just become more body aware. So they're doing, whether we call it stretching or a visualization, and listeners, you can be very creative with your words to get people participating with you, that they're going to get that body awareness, and hopefully we'll all just step into this higher sense of trust with ourselves and one another as time goes on. So Carrie, thank you so much. What's the best way for people to find you and to find these programs if they're interested in learning more about how to teach or just for fun to get more educated about how to work with people who are over 60 or going through breast cancer treatment?
Thank you. So right now, the best way, we're in the process of redoing our website. So the best way to get a hold of me is just through my email, which is Carrie, Carrie, at YMEDICA, and that's YMEDICA.com. And then we can share the different programs and potentials for your listeners' loved ones.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, and have a beautiful day. Hi everyone, Brett here with an announcement. We are starting a weekly contest giveaway over at Savannah Spirit. If you'd like to enter the contest to win one of our weekly prizes, go to savannahspirit.com/contest. If you enjoyed listening to the podcast today, would really appreciate it if you went over to iTunes and left us a review. Leave us some comments. We love your feedback, and share this podcast with anyone who you think might also enjoy it. I also wanted to invite you to go check out Savannah East, which is the name of our blog, and also the name of our Facebook group, where you can ask questions, see who's coming on the show, and share your ideas. We will post the most recent episodes there, as well as interesting articles relating to our guests and topics on the shows. Again, thank you so much for listening, and from my heart to yours, namaste.
You've been listening to the Savannah Podcast. To find out more about Savannah, go to savannahspirit.com or follow Savannah on Facebook at facebook.com/Savannah Spirit. For daily inspiration, check out our blog at savannaheast.com. Be sure to join us next week for a new episode, and thank you for listening to the Savannah Podcast.